polite there. Everybody is so polite. You don't know when people are mad at you. You don't know when people are going to, cut you off at the knees in a way that you won't even feel it. Yeah. And the damage is done before you even know. It was only upon prolonged exposure on various visits back to the academy when I was differently positioned, and I heard the discussion of senior people about more junior people along the lines of, well, I don't understand why he can't just give that up for 2 or 3 years until he gets solidly on the tenure track. And giving that up was advocacy for Aboriginal people, for example. And that person was supposed to write little articles about inconsequential matters relating to tort law or some other discipline, instead of dealing with the passion of his life. And that's a hypothetical, but it's composed of true elements. And so there's nothing scarier for me than the academy, because people don't deal frankly with you when you speak out. And the consequences, it's not just disapproval. And disapproval in the academy is that you don't get tenure, or you don't get a fellowship, or you don't get asked back to something that's important to you, and you have to reorganize your whole life. And if you have a vocation for research and scholarship, there's no place for you to reorganize your whole life. You become a member of the gypsy contingent faculty, of which there are now so many. And so, I'll take a good slugfest any day. And if somebody's standing up to me, or as one cabinet minister did when I went to make representations about the Constitution, and just turned the cabinet minister's chair right around, gave me the back of the chair, and all I could see was the smoke from the cigar rising to the ceiling. And I've had the back of judges' chairs as well, because they just didn't want to hear what I had to say. That's not scary to me. But all that creeping around the hall, deciding what is supposed to be acceptable, that's scary.
So, just to amplify that, just to amplify this comment for 1 second, because universities do a lot of very good things too.
I know that.
Okay, I don't want to let that go by the board. Well, no, I've been able to do a lot of really good things because the university has made it possible for me to do it. So, but what you're describing, Mary, is in fact this guild-like behavior, right? Mm-hmm. So there are requirements which don't include engaging in a meaningful way with the public. There are accepted standards of publication which grow narrower and narrower in the humanities and the social science. There are accepted outlets which privilege language which is exclusionary. So what you're seeing, I think, and that description is accurate, but what we're seeing is, and we create those standards. They're not imposed. Every single one of us that is a tenured faculty in a department is engaged all the time in establishing these standards which exclude. And I don't want to let anyone in this room, I don't want to exclude anyone in this room from participating in that conversation. What do we do in our own departments? We in our department finally changed promotion standards to explicitly recognize contributions made, and we use the word public space. And that's now a formal part of our promotion criteria. Well, how common is that across this country? I don't think very.
So on the topic of the guild, it's pretty clear that the space called, or the thing called the public intellectual is also a guild. It is unto itself a guild.
I'm not sure.
Okay, well, we're at the sort of halfway point where I'm supposed to stop and see if there are any questions from the audience. And then I have questions here that I had wanted to ask. But let's see, there's a half an hour left, and the idea is to get some back and forth from the audience. So I don't know if anyone's working the lights up there, but I can't see out. So if that light can be toned down, then we can see some hands, or if people will come up to the audience to the mics, then we can get the discussion going here.
Well, people are organizing themselves.
Yeah.
Can I just talk to you about that idea about the public intellectual as a guild?
Okay, yes, please.
One of the interesting things that emerged this morning in the various presentations was that people historically would take to the public stage, sometimes literally the public stage at Massey Hall or other places, because of this sense of engagement with the burning issue. They were public speakers, they were orators, and yet the case was made in an intellectually respectable and strong way. So, and these figures were, I mean, they were functioning and practicing even, you know, in the 1800s and through the 1900s, and they're way predating people who now would be described by others as public intellectuals. So maybe we just need to broaden what we think of as, you know, public intellectual, and I don't know whether you want to keep the term or not, but it's everyone who does intellectual work or advocacy work sort of publicly.
Well, if there was one goal behind this event, it was to open up that term. We know it's a problematic term. Everyone's squeamish about it, whether it's public people, whether everyone's public. Public people was a phrase that Janice Stein used last night. So yes. And the Guild comment was a not very successful attempt to try and tie some threads together. So let's just untie that and let's open up to the floor.
Thank you. That was a wonderful way of opening up the topic. But I sat there wondering what you would be saying if we lived in France or Britain or Germany, places where we've all attended conferences, where the intellectual depth of debate on subjects, a wide range of subjects, is so different from what we hear, except in some circumstances, in this country. And so I'd like to hear what you have to say about Canadian or maybe even North American culture and intellectualism. It's a bit of a put down to be called an intellectual in Tim Hortons' world.
You know, let me lead off, because Lauren, I think you're right. He is put down to be called an intellectual among some elements of the population. That wouldn't be true in France. It would be true with any French woman or French man that I've sat and drank with, frankly. So you're right, there are cultural differences. But let me make just 2 points about this. One or three, very, very quickly. Intellectual work does not exclude advocacy. In fact, the best advocacy grows out of deeply intellectual work. So that binary way of looking at the world is not, I think, persuasive to me. Secondly, there is a difference in North American culture, and it comes out of, I think, the huge importance of pragmatist philosophy in North American culture in the 18th and 19th century, which, if you compare it to France or Germany, is just absent. And those paths, and Britain, in a sense, is the hybrid. But the starker differences are with with France and Germany, because there's no pragmatic tradition in philosophy. And so by reversion, we struggle with who is one, who isn't one, and yet it's in the back of our mind, it's philosophers, right? But I think that's too narrow a construction of what this means. And if we take the pragmatists seriously, and I think we have good reason to do so, then I think we want to broaden that. Finally, I want to come back to the Tim Hortons crowd. We need to listen much harder to the Tim Hortons crowd than we do. And language which prevents that conversation from happening is actually very troubling. Look at the city from which the three of us come from. The Tim Hortons crowd, and Lorna, the Tim Hortons crowd spoke very loudly, in part because from their perspective, and they're not heard. That may be very, very difficult for us here, but they feel unheard, partly because their language is different. And they do not feel there are bridges across those divides. So those stereotypes are actually dangerous to the functioning of our democracy. The divide is growing, not diminishing. What we will be able to do collectively in public will diminish if that divide grows. And that's where I started earlier. How can we really have a genuine dialogue? How does that box grow in the face of what appears to be profound and important disagreement? The world that we're living in is, and the technology that we live amidst right now, is creating a world which I think is very troubling, because we are in contact with people that think like we do, who agree with us. Those, we retweet what we like. We rarely retweet what we think is outrageous. And these are self-segmenting communities which deeply imperil public space. So I would have to say that I think that what the Tim Hortons crowd thinks really matters, and we have to find a way to listen to it.
I think we sell ourselves short by thinking that the term public intellectual can only be ascribed to people who appear in the Globe and Mail. That is just not, that's just selling ourselves short. There are people every day in all kinds of communities, and I'm thinking of let's say Toronto, for example. I'm thinking of young people who do slam poetry, every night, someplace when I am sleeping. Yeah. And they are talking to each other, and they're having deeply important discussions. I think of the young people involved in Occupy, or the young people involved in eco movements, etc., who are talking to each other every day, and talking to groups of people like themselves every day, and who are heightening awareness of social issues and social justice issues all the time. Mm-hmm. In communities like, say, in Toronto, and like in Malvern, and in Etobicoke, God help us, and everywhere. And there are people who are doing, advocacy work on poverty, advocacy work, First Nations people doing advocacy, self-advocacy. All kinds of things are actually going on. But if we only filter the ideas through what comes back at us from the corporate media, then we miss a whole set of things that are going on, and we miss a whole set of wonderful, a whole set of things that are actually overturning the very place that we live in, but we don't really know. Because,
Dion, do you worry though that the bridges among those communities are not as wide and as strong as they should be?
I don't know. The other night I went to a talk called Real City Matters. That's put on by this group I didn't even know, and by a newspaper called The Torontoist. And there were all young people in the room, various gender and race, etc. And there were 3 or 4 speakers, including one woman from Bloomberg, an ex-deputy mayor of Bloomberg, and a woman from Scarborough, and Ronaldo Walcott, and a woman from AIDS prevention. And there was a fabulous discussion about politics in the city. And I looked around the room, and I didn't see the usual me in the room, right? But I was really thought, this is pretty good. I should come out more. I mean,
You should. You should. Well, that's right. You should.
There are a lot of activists out there, and activists don't merely, make a demo happen. They talk. They talk about ideas, and they generate ideas, and they germinate ideas, and they spread ideas. And that's what I see going on in that city. I don't know why I'm sounding so hopeful. I really am not. But but I against my better, judgment, I'm seeing some things happening in that city. I'm also seeing the things that you're seeing, which is that the alienation of certain populations in the city by the kind of mono-speak of, let's say, the Ford brothers, and the absence of speech by anybody else who thinks that the Fords are wrong, the absence of speech by those who only in private will say, well, you know, these guys are idiots. Well, then, please tell the city of Toronto how they're idiots, and please analyze that for us so that we can absorb it, you know? Please defend against the idea that just because you pay, if I tell you I'll give you $65 more in your pocket, that somehow that has nothing to do with the roads. And so there are all these other politicians who are not doing anything about articulating a much more complicated and interesting view or vision of the world, you know?
So I come from southwestern Ontario, where Tim Hortons was founded, as you know, in Stratford. And my folks are Tim Hortons folks. And
I bet they're good people.
Well, I recall a conversation I had with my mother when I was in my 20s, and I was lamenting to her that we never had any conversations. Mom, we never have any conversations. We just sit and watch TV, or the only thing we talk about is what's on TV. And she looked at me. My mother grew up in Wales in a coal mining village, and the free school ended at 14 for girls and 12 for boys. So she went to school until she was 14. And she said to me, "You're the smart one. You figure out how to talk to me."
So right.
Okay, so
Exactly.
so that's what I did. That's what I did. She made it very clear, you know. And that's when our discussions really improved.
You know, I just want to, Don, is what Mary just said, right, is what Sheila said last night. You figure out how to talk to me. If we're serious, if we care about anything public, we have to figure out how to talk to others. And we can't just talk to ourselves, which is what I worry about more and more and more.
Was there anyone at this mic? No? Well, we'll start there and then we'll move there. Okay, so
Your mother.
Hi. I want to go back to something that was brought up earlier in the panel under the terminology of passion. And what I want to do is to ask the panelists to open that question up a little bit to involve also the term risk. I'm thinking about the ways in which you each spoke really compellingly, and I too wanted to feel hopeful, even though I don't feel so hopeful so much, about speaking publicly as a woman or as someone who identifies as a woman and taking risks. So I'm thinking specifically about Gamergate. That's the cancellation by, I'm looking to people who will know her name, Anita Sarkeesian at the University of Utah, who canceled her public talk because of death threats and because the university police said, of course, if people have a registered gun license, they can bring a gun onto campus. Now, that's a different context. But I'm thinking also of, most recently today, an article in the Globe and Mail published by Stacey May Fowles about the outing of the most recent discussions of rape culture and misogyny in Canadian literary circles that are fundamentally hindering young women's writing careers. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the risk that is there when you speak publicly.
You know, again, in plain English, as I say, I work on a part of the world, the Middle East, which is in flames and inflammatory, both. And so when I speak or write about the Middle East in public, which I do very, very often, I get hate mail of a quality and a kind which, if you're a literary scholar, you would enjoy. It's creativity, its variety, its color, its texture, its imagination is almost boundless. And there are always, in every batch of it, following whatever goes on, it is always laced with threat. So the fact that some of the things we do are threatening to other people and they respond with threats is not something that I pay a lot of attention to, frankly. And you develop coping strategies for these kinds of things. So the morning after I do something, I delete everything where if I don't know the sender. And it usually burns itself out after a day. I make sure that my family never reads it, because if they did, they might organize to curtail some of what I do. But for me, it's compelling. It's a part of the world people don't understand, don't speak the languages. We bemoan and I do, the lack of knowledge of Canadian history in this country, which is so serious. Move to the Middle East. I mean, nobody really is such a small number of people in this country, other than those who've come to this country from the Middle East, really have bothered to read its history and learn its languages and understand its cultures. And yet it's a part of the world that, first of all, is intrinsically important, and secondly, matters to us. So for me then, to deepen the debate, that's how I describe it, to move the debate from the level at which it's at. And if you watched the debate in the House of Commons last week, you will all agree on how truly dreadful that debate was in terms of its quality. So to deepen the debate, I honestly don't think about the risks very much. I just don't. And so far, so good. So I would say to young people, and that's a broader comment that I make to young people that I meet very, very often, we are a very risk-averse culture in Canada. We are small C conservative. Regardless of and that's not a comment about where we stand on social justice issues or anything like that, but across the spectrum, we are very risk averse, and we communicate that risk aversity to the young people that we work with. And it's crippling. It's crippling, and it is not true of other cultures.
There are a couple of dimensions to your question about speaking on women's experience. And you mentioned the experience of the women graduate students and what happened when they started raising issues of rape culture. And I would say that is the great divide when you're speaking about women's experience, when you're speaking as a woman about experience in general. Ordinarily, and I find still after many, many years, ordinarily women who speak about the rape culture will be punished. There's no question about that. I think probably in 90% of the cases of such speech, the woman will be punished. It might not take the form of being beaten up, although it can be in that form. It will take the form of being dismissed, of being regarded as a one-note Charlotte, able to speak of nothing but your clitoris. It could take the form of being all of a sudden discovered to have a spongy intellectual capacity and therefore not worthy of being admitted to the exclusive fellowship, whatever. It always happens. I know this from my own personal experience, and I have heard people talk about this. Other senior feminists who have talked about, for example, not being willing to speak about that aspect of their experience because they thought that it would ruin them as advocates across the board. So it's not a risk. It is almost a certainty that women who speak about being sexually preyed upon will be punished. Everything else is a piece of cake. Take the risk, and for every person that wants to smack you down for saying something about hunger or the third world or politics in the Middle East, there will be at least one other person who will stand up for you. But on the question of being sexually preyed upon, it is not a risk, it's a certainty. You will be punished. And that is a big problem.
Different category.
Yeah.
Dion?
But here's the thing. Once you determine that that is what you must say, once you say that I am going to make change in the world and I'm going to speak about this because it is an injustice, there is no risk in a way, because the risk is to do nothing, right? And to still be subject to that punishment. So you have a deep opportunity, a big opportunity. And you have to figure out, like, okay, what am I losing precisely? Right? What am I losing in silence? Right? And then, to me, it just, there's no question about speaking against those things. It is very scary, right? And yes, no one will be with you, perhaps, yeah? But not to speak of it, not to do it, is worse, yeah? Because you've accepted the description of you in the world, yeah? You've accepted the positioning in the world in some way. And so, for me, speaking is liberatory. And I'm sorry that young woman in the States didn't have, like, 10 people who would just go with her and say, yeah, you're going to speak, whatever. Do you know?
That's what's astonishing to me. We had a slew of this, by the way, Dion, in the spring, of people who canceled convocation addresses because there was a threat of demonstrations, and in this particular case, physical violence. Leave aside the case with the guns, which is sui generis. Why did the others cancel their convocation addresses? Why did they cancel? What an abdication of responsibility on the part of the people who canceled those addresses. And these are all people, distinguished people, who were awarded honorary degrees and canceled because there was going to be dissent.
Yeah, like the president of that university should have assured that
I was
that she
horrified.
could speak here. It's his collusion with that whole thing.
Welcome, Evelyn
Hi.
White, to the
Thank you.
To the mic.
On the note of broadening the notion, the definition of public intellectuals, I'm a direct beneficiary of the civil rights movement in the U.S. I'm a dual citizen of Canada and the U.S. I can think about countless doctoral dissertations or, greatly rewarded manuscripts on the civil rights movement. But when I think about the most powerful commentary on the civil rights movement during my era, it is as following. Alabama got me so upset, Tennessee makes me lose my rest, but everybody knows about Mississippi, goddamn. That would be Nina Simone. So I would include her in the realm of public intellectuals.
Absolutely.
I would include Buffy St. Marie and Universal Soldier, in terms of speaking about the Vietnam War. So it is critical, in my view, that we broaden this concept and understand that public intellectuals come in many, many, many forms. And in terms of the question of risk, I am a direct descendant of people who were forbidden on the penalty of death to learn how to read or write or to speak in public. And so I am always mindful of that when I speak, that there are people who sacrificed their lives, who did not have the opportunity to have the education that I've had. So I speak for those who were forbidden to speak on the penalty of death. And so that's what I keep in my mind. So all praises to Nina, all praises to Buffy.
One point of that.
We just have one point in response to
I just want to
that.
make one point and to add a name to that list, and that's most recently Tanya Tagak, who's been getting a lot of flack for talking the truth, and so I want us to send out our, good wishes and goodwill to her and support to her.
Please go ahead.
I'm a student at Mount A, and I've come back to the fold, but with a different purpose. And the purpose is, I was a feminist back in the 70s and 80s, and I was very proud. So I spoke out against violence against women. I spoke out and took the risk and paid the high price. And with that risk, I made a mission statement that one day I will come back and do it again, but do it better and stronger and louder. Because I don't think I stand alone anymore. And I also agree, when I walked into the classroom, my first experience was with big, long words that I didn't even know what they meant. They weren't even in the Merriam-Webster dictionary. That scared me, and I thought, okay, I can make those words up too. I can learn those words. However, I'm a consumer advocate writer. I write in a newspaper. I have around the globe and across Canada. And I write on health issues. I take complex, highly scientific information and articles, transit down until somebody can understand it. Because if they can't understand it, then the world keeps on spinning in a different direction and not the direction we need to go. And I absolutely agree with the panels in each perspective on how we need to link ourselves to our communities. Because if we don't, it will diminish. It will never progress forward. If not, it becomes a big void with fractured concepts. And we need a cohesive, collaborative approach in order to move forward. Because if we can't do that, then it won't get where we need to be.
So I completely agree with you. And again, just to speak in pragmatic language, I have a lot to do with journalists. And I've learned a lot, that I could not learn in the university. And here's what I learned. A journalist starts with the following question. What's the question that the public wants answered? That's where they start. And the good ones, the really great ones. So they begin their work by trying to understand what people are worrying about or confused about or want to know more about. And that then leads the conversation. That's actually a wonderful place to start. It's a wonderful place to start, and I wish more of us did that. And more of us made time in our life to do that. And more of us took we are, in the universities, we are hugely privileged. We are supported by the public to do our work. We have this unbelievable opportunity, but we have an obligation, which is to reach out and ask when we're doing our work or when we've done our work, what does the public want answered? And how does my work help me answer that question? And then to do what you just said you did, which is to answer that question in ways to make that as accessible to as many people as possible who legitimately want to learn more. The appetite to learn more and understand more about the world among the public is enormous. We can't satisfy it, frankly. But we have to start where Sheila Rogers started, right? Last night, with what does this mean to you? And we haven't done a very good job of that.
Hi, thanks for being here. I guess I just wonder with that then, are we requesting young activists then to be the translators of the intellectual discourse we do receive in our schools, and then then we speak to the crowds? And is it our responsibility as young people to take that role on and to make it accessible? Is it young people, or is it our teachers as well?
Well, I think it will help. It always helps if young people will play that cultural interpretation role. But I would say it's also incumbent on people in my generation to clean up their act and to learn how to communicate directly rather than rely always on cultural interpreters. I mean, we have to get out of wherever we are and into a much more, the space has to be accessible, but we actually have to wish to access it as well.
We have one more question, and then we're going to do a wrap-up already. Okay.
Thank you. I have a question about this notion of risk, especially in an area where it's been raised of considerable damage as a result of speaking out, or punishment, as Mary mentioned. Dion's response was courage to carry on regardless. You said, Mary, that it's a big problem. Would you have any notion of what the solution to that problem might be in order to guide those young people into a greater understanding of what they're dealing with?
Well, people do speak out. I think that people do follow Dion's advice. And to the extent that we have had changes in the law or in social mores that make it more difficult to harm young people, harm women, or to sexually prey on anyone, it is because brave people have spoken out, or it is because if people directly involved couldn't speak out, like Rita Parsons, other people have taken up the cause. We can't stay silent. We have to speak out. We have to do better at supporting people who speak out. Women and those who are, all those who are against predation of this sort have to step up and stand in solidarity with people who will call it as they see it or as they have experienced it. And until we do this on a more regular basis, then there will always be unacceptable risk to those who take on that role. That's all I can say. I mean, we will achieve change in social mores and in law to the extent that people speak out, but people will be willing to speak out only to the extent that we will support them.
Well, I think the question, what does the public want, applied to this topic, I think a lot of people have come saying, you know, really, what is this public intellectual stuff? And that we've started to open it up, and that was a goal all along, to open up that term. But it certainly is that it is not a term that doesn't sit alongside, or rather it should encompass much more than it does in its current fairly exclusionary definition, the idea of advocacy, of activism. These are not opposite terms, but they should be rolled up much more. The idea of caring and the idea of community, that certainly any image of the public intellectual standing all alone on a podium or whatever doesn't suit the notion and the practice of speaking in public when women exercise that, which is more in the sense that, is somebody standing behind me? If I say one word, will somebody say a second word and a third word? So it certainly, if we're opening it up, which is what we're hoping to do, it's opening up to include the sense of community, which is quite a different vision than the solitary individual, caring or passion, courage, if we're talking about risk, although you've each said in one way that, well, if you've said, Janice, I'm not going to feel afraid. I'm not going to. I don't know if that's available to everybody, but there seems to be other ways of working around that if you've got somebody backing you up.
But it's also like, I'm afraid, but I have to do it.
Have to do it. Mm-hmm.
I mean,
So
what's my
courage.
alternative? I don't even know if it's courage.
Well, you know, I mean, it's
I gotta
true.
do it, I gotta live.
It's, as a number of you have said, people will say, oh, I just don't know how she stood up and said that. There is that fear, and so, yeah, it does take that courage.
I think it came up in those 70s. There were a lot of loud, noisy women, and they were wonderful. And they said whatever they liked, and yes, they got torn up and torn down and whatever, but they kind of kept going. You know what I mean? And just talking really loud.
So we're going to keep going as well. We're going to keep going. We're taking a turnaround. It's not really a break. We're going to say thank you to the first panel, and we're going to bring in a second panel. So don't go away unless it's just to stretch your legs or get a drink of water or eat an apple. And please join me in
Yes.
well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the panel. One never knows where the discussion will go.